No one tracks decision quality until the consequences show up. And by the time they do, it's already expensive. Because in leadership, we track everything: revenue, growth, KPIs, team performance. But there's one variable that sits underneath all of it, and almost no one is measuring it in real time: decision quality. We assume it's stable. We assume that because someone is experienced, capable, and high performing, that their ability to make decisions stays consistent, but it doesn't. Decision quality is not fixed, it's capacity dependent. And that's where most leaders get caught off guard because the decline doesn't happen all at once. It happens gradually, subtly, quietly. At first, it looks like small things. You take a little longer to process information. You revisit decisions you already made. You ask for more input than you used to. You sit with things longer, not because they're more complex, but because your clarity isn't as immediate. And because you're still functioning, because you're still producing, you don't label it as a problem. You normalize it. You adjust. You compensate. But here's what's actually happening underneath that. Your cognitive capacity is fluctuating. And when capacity fluctuates, decision quality follows. This is the part that doesn't get enough attention. Because leadership is often framed as strategy, mindset, or skill. But at its core, leadership is a cognitive function. It requires clarity, speed, pattern recognition, and emotional regulation under pressure. And all of those are directly tied to how your brain is functioning in the moment. Not your experience, not your title, not your intention, your brain. And when that system is under sustained load, without enough recovery, it does not perform the same way. Processing slows down. Signal becomes harder to distinguish from noise. Confidence decreases, not because you don't know what to do, but because your brain is working harder to get there. And this is where the hidden cost begins, because declining decision quality doesn't show up immediately as failure. It shows up as friction: more meetings to reach clarity, more conversations to confirm direction, more back and forth before execution. You start to see delayed decisions, reversed decisions, over collaboration where decisiveness used to exist. And it looks like a process issue. It looks like a team issue. It looks like a communication issue. But often it's a capacity issue. Let me say that again. What looks like a leadership or organizational issue is often a capacity issue at the top. And this is where the cost compounds, because slower decisions don't just delay timelines, they affect momentum. They affect confidence across the team. They affect how quickly opportunities are captured or missed. And over time, that becomes organizational drag. Not because the leader isn't capable, but because their capacity isn't stable. And the most important part of this conversation is this: you can maintain output for a period of time while decision quality is declining. That's why it goes unnoticed. That's why high performers are especially vulnerable, because they don't know when to slow down when their capacity drops. They compensate, they push harder, they override the signals, and that works until it doesn't, because eventually the gap becomes too large. And that's when you start to see clear missteps, poor timing, strategic errors that don't align with the leader's actual capability. And at that point, it gets labeled as burnout or stress or pressure. But the reality is the decline started much earlier at the level of capacity. So the real question is not, am I making good decisions? The real question is, how stable is the system that produces my decisions? Because if your cognitive capacity is fluctuating, your decision quality will fluctuate with it. And that's where leadership risk lives. Not in the obvious moments, but in the subtle, compounding ones. So here's a simple way to start assessing this in real time. Run a quick signal check. S. How is your sleep quality, duration, and recovery? How often are you being interrupted during focused thinking? G. This is where you do the gut check. Do your decisions feel heavier or slower than they used to? And do you have protected thinking time? I call this my non-negotiable thinking time. A. How much control do you actually have over your calendar? And L. And I want you to think about this question really seriously. If nothing changes, what does your decision quality look like in 6 months? You don't need perfection. You need awareness. Because once you can see their pattern, you can start to stabilize it. And that's the shift. Leadership is not just about making the right decisions. It's about maintaining the capacity to make high quality decisions consistently over time, under pressure, without degradation. And that is a different kind of skill set. That is where longevity becomes a leadership advantage. So if you are noticing that your decisions are taking longer, that clarity isn't as immediate, that things feel heavier than they should, don't default to working harder. Look at your capacity, because that is where your leverage is. If you want a structured way to assess this, download the Executive Capacity Audit or book a strategy call. Both links are in my LinkedIn bio. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, DM me capacity and I will send you the link to my webinar and my strategy call. And if you want to go deeper into this info and identify and stabilize this early, join me for my live session. You're not burned out. You're operating at reduced capacity. And I'm going to tell you how to fix it tonight at 6 p.m. That's where we'll break this down further. Or, like I said, book a strategy call with me and we'll map out exactly where your capacity is leaking. Until tonight at 6 p.m. or 12:30 tomorrow. Remember, protecting your capacity is protecting your leadership sustainability.